Thank you very much, Diana. Over to Matt now.
Thanks, Maria, comrades, brothers and sisters. I'll give a bit of a perspective from a union that was affiliated to the Labour Party and then disaffiliated from the Labour Party and then reaffiliated to the Labour Party. Because I think it does actually say something about some of the political debates that lots of working people have gone through, some of the experiences about engaging with politics and engaging with the Labour Party, the traditional party that working people have looked to. So, I mean, our union, we're a small public service, small union in that regard. We affiliated to the Labour Party in 1927, and we were affiliated all right through until 2004. And what our experience was in the 1980s, particularly the 1990s, as a union that is in local government by and large, not all fire services are, but generally a local government service, is that we were increasingly coming into conflict with employers, and in many cases, if not the most cases, those were Labour-led fire authorities. And we had a number of disputes during the 1990s with Labour-led fire authorities, and this began to, I have to say, even before the Blair government, before New Labour, this had started to raise a debate in our union about the relationship with the Labour Party. In 2002, you may recall, we launched a campaign on pay, and the reaction that our members got, we haven't had a dispute since a national dispute since 1977. And I don't think many of our members were ready, in reality, for the onslaught that they got. And we were attacked, including by a whole number of Labour politicians, and one of whom described us as criminally irresponsible for daring to demand a pay rise and then to ballot for industrial action. We took that action and we eventually settled this dispute, but that experience had a huge impact on the thinking of members of the Fire Brigade Union and on the activists of the Fire Brigade Union. In 2004, at our conference, a number of positions were put, including one to disaffiliate. It wasn't the position that I personally argued for, actually. I would have argued a different position, which probably would have ended up getting us expelled as the RMT subsequently were. But without any doubt in my mind, it was a democratic decision of our conference, and that decision to disaffiliate. But it was quite remarkable, and I think that one of the, in terms of discussing the relationship between unions and the Labour Party, I think that experience of ourselves and of the RMT, I think it is both interesting. And however, I mean, that decision didn't mean we moved away from politics. We've always been a political union. We've always seen the need for political organisation, political engagement. We've maintained throughout that period of disaffiliation a parliamentary group. Our parliamentary group, again, has always only been of Labour MPs. Some parliamentary groups are broader and include MPs from other parties. Ours never has. Ours has always been a Labour group. And interestingly, the person who helped set that group up was John McDonnell, and Jeremy Corbyn has been a member of our group from the start. In fact, we've got pictures of Jeremy Corbyn on our picket lines in the first ever firefighters dispute in 1977, probably the best record of any MP you can find in Parliament in terms of supporting us. And of course, if you think about the dynamics of this on how people in the union view what's going on, there was this period of great deal of alienation from the Blair government, and at the same time there were other politicians, Labour politicians, with whom the union and its members had a very strong affinity, and this was added to the dynamics of that discussion. After 2010, actually our relationship did quite significantly improve with Ed Miliband. We worked with the Labour Party very closely on our campaign over pensions, and our members could see actually political engagement. We had at the request of the Labour Party in Parliament, we had a special debate on our pensions. We took several hundred members into Parliament and they could see it directly, people arguing their case. And that was again a political learning process of seeing people argue on political issues that were going to directly affect them in their lives and how that was played out in the political process. So that was a very interesting period as well. After the 2015 election, I have to say, it looked pretty bleak. And I'll say this, that in terms of some of the debates that are going on in the Labour Party now, I was at meetings immediately after the 2015 general election, where a number of people were saying from the start, let's be clear, this isn't just 5 years, the Tories are going to win the next general election as well. We're in for at least a decade of Tory government. Interesting to see how that plays out now that some people are trying to blame Jeremy Corbyn for whatever, anything and everything that goes wrong in the Labour Party, the opinion polls or anywhere else. But some people clearly had already got that perspective. And then, and I think it is worth going over some of these things, they had this decision to run the leadership election. And then you had this very fascinating process developing in British politics. Because once Jeremy Corbyn got on the ballot paper, and our union very early on decided to support him, despite the fact we weren't affiliated, we decided to support Corbyn politically, financially, and in whatever way we could. And it began to create something quite remarkable. And it's easy to forget that now we're a year down the line. It's easy to forget what a transformation of British politics this was, because this was someone seen by the press, by the media, by the political establishment as a complete outsider, a complete no-hoper, who clearly was running against the tide, whose ideas were balmy, and shouldn't have had a hope in hell of getting anywhere in this process. And yet remarkably, Jeremy did manage to win gradually more and more support in the trade unions, but also this remarkable political debate that began to emerge through social media, through rallies. And think about this, when we're told time and time again people aren't interested in politics, and you had Jeremy Corbyn's campaign filling a hall of 1,000 people in Hull on a Tuesday night or whatever it was, and if you recall that, I think the final leadership campaign rally in Camden, where there's a picture which I think tickles me of these two teenagers breaking in, but they were breaking into a political meeting because they couldn't get through the door, so they were climbing through a window to get into a political meeting to hear this guy in his 60s talk about politics. And that says something quite interesting about what was happening. Also, it tells you something about what was happening before, because why was it that unions like ourselves ended up in that position? Why was it that large numbers of Labour Party voters became somewhat alienated? And I think part of that process was what has happened since 1979, with we were debating in the EU referendum, neoliberalism and so on, actually that increasingly the political narrative was confined to a very and increasingly narrow set of opportunities. There are things that you couldn't raise politically that possibly you could have raised 20 years ago, and actually you're now beginning to raise again. And if you take trade union rights, one of the frustrations of many unions with the Blair-Brown government is the failure to address the attacks of the previous Tory government on our trade union rights. And it's one reason why I think there was tension throughout those years of the Blair-Brown government. So when you hear someone who unapologetically says, I am a trade unionist and I support trade union rights, that began to touch a nerve with people and to strike a spark with people. And to be honest, it was a breath of fresh air, I think, for many of us. When you've got, in terms of our own union, what happened next is that after the election, we again had a very quick discussion in our union, and we decided that actually we assessed what was going on, the arguments, and perhaps people will want to comment on that, but there clearly are major divisions among some people in the Labour Party. I think we've moved on a little bit, but there clearly are a lot of people who would prefer, let's be frank, who would prefer if Jeremy Corbyn wasn't the leader. And our view was, having supported him, we wanted to get involved in that debate and that discussion, first of all about what we wanted out of a potential Corbyn government, what we wanted to say politically as a union, and we opened a debate around re-affiliating to the party. And we called a special conference last November, and we re-affiliated late last year. And I have to say, interestingly, I expected a much stronger opposition to that. Having disaffiliated in just 12 years earlier, I expected a much stronger opposition to that. There was some opposition, and clearly politics has moved very differently in Scotland, for example, and we had to take account of that in our discussion with our members. But the conference very quickly, I think the mood of our activists was very much, yeah, let's just get on with the job, let's affiliate, because we want to get on with this campaign. And so we were very clear publicly that we affiliated to the Labour Party with our own agenda, which is the Fire Brigade Union's policies. We are going in there to argue for our policies, as other affiliates do. We're going in there to argue for trade union policies, trade union rights, for policies that challenge austerity and so on. And I think that what the Corbyn campaign and election has opened up is new possibilities to discuss that type of politics, and I think that's what's fantastic about this opportunity that we face. And if you think about and the things that we've been discussing all through the day, our members, like many of you in the room, like many of the people you represent or work with, have been through a pretty bleak period. Since 2007-8 and the banking crisis, and then a worldwide economic crisis. And the response to that across much of the world has been these policies of austerity. I mean, it's bizarre, isn't it, that I was reading articles after the banking crisis saying, this is a result of deregulation, this will mean the end of neoliberalism. And actually what we've seen is the complete opposite of that. We've seen a new drive to attack public sector here and across the world. We've seen a new drive to drive down wages, to attack pensions. So in the public sector we've seen, to be frank, a number of setbacks on our pensions, on pay, on public services. In my own sector, we've seen cuts on a scale we've never seen in history, actually. Some 7,000 jobs gone. We're only a small part of public services. 7,000 jobs gone in the fire service, 40 plus fire stations closed, dozens of fire engines axed. And it all means, the improvement that they talk about, it takes longer to get to an emergency or fire than it did 20 years ago. That's the net result of these cuts to our service. So our members, like other public sector workers and like workers in a whole range of industries, have had a pretty bleak time. And I think what we want to be discussing, and what I think the Jeremy Corbyn election gives us the opportunity to start discussing, is what do ordinary people want out of politics? What do ordinary people want? This question of trade union rights. Labour has now launched this Workplace 2020 review, which is discussing with trade unions, I think for the first time in many, many years, realistically, what do we want? What do we want about workplace rights, about trade union rights? What do we want to happen to that trade union legislation that has hamstrung us for so many years? I think if you take we can have a discussion about the Trade Union Act as it is now, but for me, undoubtedly, I think that the Labour opposition to the Trade Union Bill was strengthened enormously by Jeremy Corbyn being unapologetic in his opposition to that, and I think it was like a breath of fresh air.